Well, good morning and welcome. Welcome back to campus. It's so nice to see all of you on this beautiful day. And you are in for a real treat today. It's my pleasure to welcome you back to the Cal campus. I'm Lachelle Blakemore, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Associate Vice Chancellor for Development and Alumni Relations, and a proud Cal Bear myself. Today, we are gathered to reconnect with each other, to dive into democracy, a very important and timely topic, and to learn about what's happening at the university that we all love so much. We are also here to say thank you. Thank you for choosing to spend your day with us. Thank you for your meaningful gifts and engaged participation in the Benjamin Ide Wheeler Society. And thank you for making the Berkeley Dream possible in so many ways. The Wheeler Society is named after Benjamin Ide Wheeler, who served as the University of California president from 1899 to 1919. And he worked with great philanthropists and visionaries of the day and transformed Berkeley from a small Western university into one of the most distinguished centers of learning in the nation. And he also arranged Berkeley's first planned gift. This was a gift from Jane Sather, who led to the building of our most cherished landmark and most important symbol of the Cal community and contributions to the world, the Campanile. Today, planned gifts represent about a quarter of our individual donations from our donor community. And in this economically volatile world that we're living in, your support plays a crucial role in ensuring a stable fiscal foundation for generations to come. So really deep, deep gratitude and appreciation for all that you do. On behalf of our students and faculty, thank you for being a part of and continuing an extraordinary tradition of giving. So now I'd like to introduce today's featured faculty speaker, Professor Lisa Garcia-Bedoya, class of 1992. Sorry, Lisa. Lisa serves as the Vice Provost for Graduate Studies and the Dean of the Graduate Division. She's also a professor in the Berkeley School of Education. And Lisa's work explores causes of educational and political inequalities in America, considering differences in ethno-race, gender, class, and geography. Lisa has consulted for presidential campaigns and statewide ballot efforts. And she's developed expertise in engaging and mobilizing voters in low-income communities of color. Professor Garcia-Bedoya will talk about what is sure to stir up a lively conversation, how to transform our democracy. You will find index cards on your table for your questions, which we'll take at the end. So I will return to the stage when Lisa is finished with her remarks and moderate our conversation. Please join me in welcoming Professor Garcia-Bedoya.
Thank you, Lachelle, for that kind introduction. Sorry, let's go back to, and I'd like to I'm just so grateful to be here. Thank you also, thank you to Lachelle and to Susan's Parish and to all of the wonderful folks at UDAR who put this together. I think you can agree with me that this is a spectacular setting, and it's just so lovely to be here on such a beautiful summer day. I'm also grateful that all of you came. I was telling someone earlier, whenever you agree to give a talk, it's sort of like holding a party and hoping that people come. And so I'm really grateful that you're all here. And so, as Lachelle said, this is a little bit different than your usual research talk. So what I'm going to do is try to share what I've learned over the past 20 years. I'm trained as a political scientist, and I work directly with community-based organizations. So these are 501c3, often they also have a 501c4. Organizations that work every day in communities to try to address the kinds of problems that all of us care about. So school board issues, clean water, safety, health issues, environmental justice, all of that. And so what I do is I use my nerd tools as a social scientist to try to help them be more effective in their practice. And the reason why I do this is because I have always wondered what it is that makes some people step up and get engaged in politics and other people not, and how experiences of both marginalization and privilege affect that, right? Because both can exist in the same person. And then what are the strategies to help fix that? And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So what is the problem? I think often in the United States, we don't have perspective on just how low our participation rates are. And so if we look at the 2022 midterm election, which I'm sure you saw all the headlines that said this was record turnout, oh my gosh, we should be so happy, so many people voted. Even in that record election, 48% of eligible voters did not vote. And when I say eligible voters, I mean what we call CVAP, which is citizen voting age population. So people who are over 18 and citizen. This doesn't count all of the many people who are under 18 or who are not citizens, who are part of our society, who don't have the opportunity to exercise the franchise. So this is just of those proportion of people that can, only 48% turned out. And so what I would argue is that our elections today are actually being decided more by the people who don't engage than the people who do, right? Because the folks who are sitting out, and if we believe that those folks are rational in sitting out, we have to think about what we have to fix in order to change that. Similarly, 30% of eligible voters in 2022 did not even register to vote. Here in California, the most common party registration is no party preference or decline to state. People are not choosing one of the political parties. You have significant racial differences in registration and turnout, which I'm going to talk about. And the folks least likely to vote in American society are youth of color. And since in California, that is the majority of our youth, I think it's something that we should think about and be talking about. So just to put a finer point on this, so the high point of participation here in the United States is presidential elections. So if you'll see, I want you to pay attention, I'm sorry, it's a little hard with these screens, maybe this isn't gonna work, to the empty space on top, right? So the high point, so in 2020, pretty good participation in politics, you had 71%, so the white line is folks who identify as white but not Latine. Black is the kind of orangish line. The dark blue is Asian origin, and then green is Latine or Latinx. I like Latine because the X doesn't exist in Spanish, but folks of Latin American origin. This is all from the current population survey, so this is the census definitions of these categories. But you can see that even the highest turnout group is only 71%, which is folks who identify as white. You have blacks at 62%, just over 63%. Asian American folks at 58 roughly, and then Latina folks at 54. So pretty low for a presidential election that had a lot of interest. And I'm assuming since you came to this talk, you have some interest in politics. You're probably hanging out with people who have some interest in politics. And for folks who are interested and who read the Post or who read the New York Times, it's hard to imagine folks who just don't care about any of this. But I'm here to tell you a large proportion of Americans are in that category. And so we need to think about why that is. Similarly, this is midterm election turnout. Since 2002, you can see the line is much lower. We have much lower turnout in midterm elections, where the high bar, again, in 2022, you've got 58% of white folks. This is nationally, right, across the United States, and only 38% of Latina folks. So significant differences across groups, but overall, really low, right, for everybody. I'm going to take a minute to explain this slide. So we had been talking about those previous two slides were the United States population overall. This slide represents California, right? Who is left out? So the top row of little people with the purple people, that's all California voters. So for every 10 eligible California voters, basically 6 turned out, right? This is in 2022. 4 turned out. The dark gray are the folks who are non-voters, right? So first of all, pay attention to how much gray is on this slide, right? That's a problem number 1, right? So 6 out of 10 did not turn out. You can see there's significant racial differences. So the kind of tealish green, those are folks who identify as white. You have roughly 60% of those turning out. Among black folks, it's 40%, right? So it's the orangish folks over there. And then the bottom two are our two immigrant origin populations, Asian Americans and Latine, and you can see the numbers down to 3. And you can imagine, or I would argue, that as we're talking about our democracy, we're talking about the legitimacy of our democracy, having this many people, and again, these are just eligible voters, right? You're not talking about all the other non-citizen folks that live in US society, not be part of the democratic process, I think is really troubling for the future, especially because these trends are even more pronounced among young people. And so what I'm going to talk about for the rest of today is how we fix this. What is it that needs to happen in order for this to get fixed? So I would argue that part of what got us here is, in fact, how we run campaigns. And so the biggest take home I want you to take away, so number one, we have a problem in terms of people sitting out. We shouldn't pathologize those folks. There's good reasons why people sit out. And number two, the parties are not going to fix this. So this is absolutely a nonpartisan talk. This is kind of a pox on both their houses, because both parties do this, right? So the first thing that they do is the political consultant comes in, you're running a campaign, Lachelle, you want to run for office, and they're going to tell you what your win number is. And your win number is, we're going to guess how many people are going to turn out, and all we care about is that you get 50.1% of those folks. So for the political consultant, if 100 people turn out or 1,000, they don't care as long as you get your 50%, right? And so they have no interest in bringing more people into the system, because when you bring new people into the system, you don't know how they're going to vote. Those are wild cards. They don't want those folks. They want the folks that they know are going to back their candidate, right? And so they target likely voters, and they target likely voters who are of the party to vote for their candidate. They tend to emphasize TV ads. How many people have seen a TV ad for a political campaign, right? Or digital, right? So social media, Facebook, all those kinds of things, that's the emphasis. The reason they emphasize TV ads, sorry to be cynical about this, political consultants, in case you don't know, get a kickback for every bit of airtime they sell to a candidate. They get a 1% kickback. So that's where they make most of their money. Many of them actually don't charge the candidate very much, but then they get money off of the media that they buy. And so obviously they're going to buy a lot of TV because they're going to make money. They tend to have a one-size-fits-all approach. So I did a study on clean money campaigns in local areas across the country. So this included places, it included Miami-Dade, the state of Maine, Maryland, just outside of DC, Seattle, Albuquerque. I think that's it. But as you can imagine, those are very different parts of the country, right? And every consultant in all of those places used the same strategy. They contacted white likely voters, even in Miami-Dade, Florida. And so then the argument was, well, people in Miami-Dade don't want, public financing of campaigns. And it's like, no, you just ran a bad campaign and didn't talk to the right people. And so there's a one-size-fits-all. We're going to look at likely voters who tend to be mostly white and older. And then if you're not a registrant of a party, they tend to not want to contact you because they don't know how you're going to vote. And so I'm not going to waste my money on you if I'm not certain that you're on my team. And so all of the incentives for the people who run campaigns are really to target a very small number of people you know are going to support you, and try to keep actually other folks out so they don't mess with your win number. And that is true, again, on both sides. I think instead, as we think about, well, how can we change this? What should our approach be? I think there's some important guiding principles that we've developed. The first, and this may seem obvious, but again, if you have a one-size-fits-all strategy, you're sort of assuming that the same secret sauce is going to work for everybody in the same way, right? So first of all, that not all voters are the same, even if they share group membership or life experience. So just because I'm a Latina doesn't mean that the same strategy is going to work for me as some other Latina who lives in the Central Valley, as an example, right? Just because we hold the same identification doesn't necessarily mean we're going to care about the same things or react to the same things. And that the ways in which race matters in politics is because it suggests a shared set of lived experiences. It's not, I think we tend to talk about it in this very biological sense, right? We talk about the Black vote, or you talk about how many CNN pundits have been talking about the Latino vote, right? Or whatever. Well, that presumes that everybody in that community is somehow the same just because they're part of that community, which is kind of a weird concept if you think about it. And so we need to remember that if folks from a particular community or from a particular area vote in a similar way, it's because they've had a set of shared experiences that has led them to think in similar kinds of ways or to understand the world in similar kinds of ways. It's not necessarily because of the racial group they belong to. That voters don't come to a message or a candidate blank. This is something that, again, I think we do a lot. We assume like, oh, this thing is going to be persuasive, but we don't remember that 4 years ago you talked to the same person and you promised them X or Y and you didn't actually do those things. And that legacy remains. We did focus groups with young voters in 2016, and what people kept saying is they were mobilized by Obama and they were so excited, and nothing changed, right? So then the next candidate is gonna have to work a little bit harder to mobilize that person because now they have that track record and that disillusion that has to be overcome. And just to remember that folks don't just sort of enter as a blank slate, but you have some priors that have to be considered in order to be able to move them to behave differently, because that's what you're asking them to do. And then finally, that you really have to educate people. And what we found is developing what we call counter narratives, which is if you've been told all your life that you or the people like you don't have power, or you and the people like you can't make change, you have to give someone another story to tell about themselves. And often what is effective is to tell people stories of how people like them have won or have made change. But that is an education piece. The thing I like to say is that parties tend to ask people to marry them before they've dated, right? So you go straight to a vote without getting to know them in any way. And we have to actually spend more time building a relationship before we ask somebody to act. So how do we do that? We basically start by talking about the things that people care about. So you really start by listening, which may seem obvious, but if you can imagine how kind of the political industrial complex doesn't really start this way. And so what we know is that if you talk about the things, I'm going to talk a lot about voters of color because you'll see they were the ones that were the least likely to engage, and that's where my work has focused, but I think this is true for everyone. And so we know that people of color generally are more likely to say they care about the economy and education. Younger folks of color tend to talk more in surveys about the concerns about racism and social justice. We are ahead of the curve here in California, that we've done an incredible job reforming our electoral system. So we now have automatic voter registration. If people go to public offices, we have voting centers now, in case folks haven't, I don't know if it depends on your county. We've rolled it out slowly, but the fact you can vote now in a voting center, you don't have to go to a precinct. We have online voter registration. We've done all of these reforms, vote by mail being automatic. But the thing is we knew before those reforms were going in that certain communities are more likely to take advantage of them than others. So as an example, Latina voters are the least likely to vote by mail, largely because folks don't trust putting it in the mail and thinking that it's gonna get counted, right? And so thinking about why is it some folks need to vote in person and how do we facilitate that, right, in the process. And as I mentioned, people are generally frustrated with politicians and politics. All the groups I work with, even those that were working for a candidate, it's never good to knock on the door and start about the candidate. You have to really start about what are the issues that matter to the person and then say how this candidate might actually, in fact, do those things. But leading with the person is not a successful strategy. So a few things that need to happen. First, that voters need onboarding. I say this as someone who has taught American politics at the college level for many, many years. Americans are not taught a whole lot about how our system works, particularly on the local level. If you ask most people, they don't know what their city council person does. They don't know what their state legislator does. And those people mess it up because they tend to take positions on things they actually have no authority over, right? So when the state legislator talks about immigration, guess what? That's not his job. But people don't know that, right? Or when the president says, I'm going to fix education. No, he's not, because that's actually not his job. And so the problem is these levels and the overlapping jurisdiction that is federalism is actually quite confusing, and most people don't know about it. And so, in fact, again, that education piece is really missing because the way we teach civics is how many members of Congress are there? Can you pass the AP government exam, essentially, right? But that's not really telling you how to access politics. And so you have to explain to people why it is that that city council person matters, right? Or why is it that that state legislator matters? Especially if you care about Berkeley. We care a lot about the state legislature, right? But a lot of people just don't know. And I think remembering that piece, that connective piece is really important for people to learn. The other thing is that the voting process is actually quite complicated. I think we don't think about it, but how thick was our last ballot in California? 146 pages, 135 pages. I have a PhD in political science. I can't read it. I don't know about all of you. And then I have all my family members saying, what does this mean? I'm like, I don't know, right? It's very complicated. And when I interviewed young people for my first book, the other thing that's really scary, particularly for young people who have family members who aren't citizens and don't vote, is they don't know what's behind that curtain, right? They don't know what the machine looks like. And they don't want to feel stupid, right? Because when you're 18, that's your worst nightmare. And so they just don't go. Yolo County had one of the highest rates of youth voting in California, and folks largely attributed it to the fact that the registrar just went to the high school with the machine and showed them the machine, right? I know that may sound silly, but it matters, right? Just helping people overcome that first level of discomfort. Voting by mail is not that simple either. And so what some of the women in one of our studies did is they were newly naturalized. It was their first time voting, and they all felt really uncomfortable and worried about making the wrong decision. So they gathered in the house of the smartest one, that's how they put it, the smartest lady among them, and they together went through the ballot and decided how to vote and filled it out together, right? So there are ways in which you can help people overcome that worry, but we forget that for people who think voting is really important, they actually are really afraid of making a mistake. And so holding people's hands and helping people learn how to vote is important, and that the process is really intimidating to a lot of people. This is one that came out of, I think, both 2016 and 2020, and that I think we're seeing again. There's a presumption that anger mobilizes. And what we have found is that anger mobilizes some people. But if you are basically telling folks who have been told their whole lives that they don't have power and that they don't matter, that there's somebody running for office that thinks they don't have power and they don't matter, they'll say, fine, I'm out. Right? I'm going to focus on the thing that, I can control, which is my job and my family and my daily life. And I'm going to just not worry about all this stuff because it doesn't make me feel good to be in that space. And so anger mobilizes if you have a good sense of your own place and position in politics. But this idea that saying kind of negative, the outrage, right? This is where we're at with social media. Everything is about creating outrage so that people will click. But the problem is, for most of us, outrage just makes us detach because you can't hold that. It's not a good feeling to hold, right? And so I think there's this idea that if you just sort of make people upset enough and you tell them all the things that are wrong, that's going to move them. And for many people, it just makes folks detach. And so messages that really focus on collective power, that people like me can win, the ways in which people can make a difference, the things that have changed in society, that's a much more effective strategy than anger and outrage. And then last, we have found that digital outreach is really not effective for changing people's behavior. It's actually quite effective for people who are regular voters to get that text reminding you, oh, right, today's election day, I should turn my ballot in. It's actually super helpful for people who are already engaged. What happens generally on social media in campaigns is that if there is outreach to members of ethno-racial groups, it's often symbolic. But it doesn't say anything about, so it'll say like, Black power, or it'll say something about Latina power, but it won't talk about why that matters to your life, right? It doesn't say anything substantive. And studies have found that actually a sense of linked fate with community does matter in terms of how people choose to vote. So for example, among Latina voters in 2020 who actually thought Trump was doing a good job, if they felt strong connections to their community, they were less likely to say they were still going to vote for him, as an example, right? So there's a relationship there because of the concerns about how he had treated the community. And so if you want to talk about racial solidarity, you really have to root it in something real. And this may seem obvious, but I have to say I was texted by a presidential campaign for the first time in my life in the last election when Biden was running. So yay, I got a text. Somebody tried to mobilize me. And it was to invite me to a mariachi performance. Good, tomato, tomato. At least I got a text. But that's not going to work, right? That's not going to, if you were trying to change my behavior or make me feel excited about you as a candidate, tell me something real. And one of my colleagues, Marcia Abrahano, if you're interested in this, wrote a great book on this, that she compared English language ads that were targeted towards Latina voters and Spanish language ads, and found systematically that the ones in Spanish had almost no policy content. And so obviously that's not going to help people vote, right? Me seeing, and plus I'm Cuban, so mariachi not super helpful. But that's another problem we'll get into later. But you know, it's lovely. It was nice to be invited, but that's not really going to change my behavior if I'm somebody that doesn't feel powerful in politics. So symbolism is important if it's connected to action and some kind of impact. So how do we fix this? So I would argue, first of all, the political parties are not going to get us out of this mess. The folks who are going to get us out of this mess are the folks who are organizing people on the ground, who know their communities, who are working every day in those communities to make people feel connected and supported and address the things that people care about in their daily lives. And so when those groups go out and talk to people, and it's important that the person talking to the person be similarly situated. In other words, somebody from your neighborhood. It doesn't have to be, you know, a woman talking to a woman or a Black person talking to a Black person, but somebody who at least shares your experience in some meaningful way. The conversation has to be rooted in people's lived experience. You've got to meet folks where they're at. So what are the things that matter in their community? What are the things that they're struggling with in terms of healthcare, in terms of transportation, clean water? We've been doing a lot of work in the Central Valley. It is awful how few people have access to clean water, right? And so really important things that you have to engage with, and start with what do people care about? This is the active listening part. What do you care about, and how can I tell you the way to fix that? Speaking to shared values, like, you care about this thing, and you know what, I really care about it too, and this is why. You know, I also have a kid, or I also have an elderly parent, or I also have to work 2 jobs, or whatever is the thing, but really speaking to how we care about the same things and want to fix the world in the same way. But also you have to name the harm. So this is not the outrage, right? But this is really saying, here's the problem, like, this is a problem. And by naming the harm, you can also start talking about how we fix the problem, right? But really say, this is a problem that is causing harm that somebody has to do something about. And so then you have to help folks feel like they're the person who can do something about that thing, right? So really making people feel like they have agency, making people feel like they have the ability to actually influence things. Because as you know, I'm sure in some of your conversations, people will say, oh, this thing is just so horrible, but you know, it's the way it is, or that's just the way the world is, or that's just, we can't do anything about it. So really helping people name the harm, but also say, you know what, you can actually help me fix this. If we work together, we can try to start fixing this. And to do that, to give people a solution. Again, this is often, we get the outrage, but no place to put it, right? No place to actually actively engage with something constructive and helpful. You have to build something. People want to build something, not just be told all the things that are wrong, right? Because that's not going to make you feel good or powerful or able to influence things. So, and again, so this is the pox on both their houses part. Just to reiterate that the parties are broken. And if you talk to people even people who are engaged, but especially the folks who aren't engaged, what we consistently hear over and over in the focus groups that we've done and in our surveys is that most people think the parties just don't care about them, right? They don't care about their needs. They don't care about what's happening in their daily lives. They don't know that one is good and one is bad. We've had people say, I did a focus group where people said that the Republican Party was the party that was actually cares about the minimum wage, and that the Democratic Party was the party trying to shut down the border. And so there's a lot of misinformation about even what the parties represent. But even still, neither one feels like they're actually going to be able to fix the problems that people really care about. And folks are generally pretty disgusted with how things are going. And this is also the issue with kind of the slash and burn approach of using negative campaigning and whatnot, right? Because again, because the political consultants only care who turns out for their person, they can do negative ads and basically tell you everybody's horrible, and all the people who are already cynical are going to sit out, and you're going to get the few people who are going to back your person, and right, and that's all they care about. And so that disgust, I think, is something that we really have to work on. The dangerous part that we found, especially in the last cycle, is that people really want things to be fixed. We were doing focus groups in Milwaukee, and I should have known this, but I was shocked to learn like how much violence there is in Milwaukee, and people's just sense of desperation in terms of their inability to fix it. and just feeling like nobody's doing anything, right? The local government's not doing anything, the state government's not doing anything, and they don't care who does it. A purple cow could do it. They just care that it get done, right? And that's the thing that people are really looking for. And what that does is it leaves the door open to sort of a charismatic populist leader who tells you that they can fix it, right? Which again is not true. Our president doesn't have a whole lot of power, right? But if you get a megalomaniac, no one comes to mind, that says they can fix it, people want somebody they just want them to fix it. And so as an example, one of the quotes that stuck with me, so we were interviewing, this was a Black woman in Milwaukee who lived in public housing, who was a Trump supporter and said she was a Trump supporter, weirdly, because he said such outrageous things. And what she said was, no college student could have written that, right? Which has its own logic, right? He's clearly not scripted. Whatever, you agree with him or not, at least he's real. And so that desire for authentic leadership is really profound. And Joe Biden is not the person that people get that from. Ironically, right, because Joe has the reputation of being unscripted, but people, at least the people we've been talking to, see him as very scripted. They see him as a traditional politician and who's just not real or authentic. And so folks don't feel excited and warm about that. And so that's something to think about, because you don't want it to be that you get some really charismatic person who's going to completely take us off the rails in terms of democracy. But I think a lot of people are open to that. So just some quick conclusions, that many of the voters of color, at least that we've been talking to, feel both powerless and ignored. And so it's really about, again, not pathologizing people. This isn't that people don't care about the country. It's not that people don't care about what's happening in their communities. It's that they just don't really think that the political process is the place where they can fix things. And so reimagining people's sense of place within the political process is really important. The pandemic has only, I think, exacerbated trends that were already there. People are feeling much less connected to community. They're feeling much less secure on a bunch of levels, economically, in terms of health, other things. And so that doesn't help people then feel positive about the political system. People are generally unaware of who does what. And that's also a problem, because people don't understand, especially we have the lowest participation in local elections. I think the last LA election, they were not even in the double digits. I think it was like 9% of eligible voters. And local government is actually the government that affects us the most, right? They're the ones that decide, like, does your trash get picked up? Does that pothole get fixed? Never in Berkeley, but anyway. Do these things get done? That actually, does that stop sign get built, right? Local government has a big effect on people's lives. And generally speaking, folks don't understand what they do. In general, the people we've been talking to are not hopeful about politicians' understanding of them or their lives. They just don't think that they get it, what's happening. And that messages that reinforce cynicism and distrust will only increase disaffection, right? If you sort of reiterate to people that things are really messed up, that doesn't make people motivated to feel like they can fix them, right? It just makes them depressed. And so the way to fix this, and so if you have family members who are disaffected, or if you want to get involved in an organization and go door to door or do any of those things, the important things is to talk about politics in a way that engages and uplifts and really fosters hope and trust and feelings of agency, with the one caveat that hope is really hard, right? And so you don't want to make people feel hopeful and then not do the things that you are going to do. And so the piece that's often missing with mobilization is the accountability piece, right? So after I've come and asked you for your vote, I need to come back to you in a year and say, here's what you got, here's what's changed, right? Or here's what's happened, or here's what this person has done. So that people don't feel like it went into an ether, you asked me this transactional thing and then it didn't make any difference in my life. And so the more we can tell those stories of the really good things that are happening in government and at the local level, or the positive things that people are doing in their communities, the better able we will be to make more people feel like democracy is in their interest and something that they have to be a part of. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Lisa. That was really interesting, motivating, sobering. Very insightful. So thank you so much for your wisdom and reflections. We do have a number of questions from the audience. As a political scientist, what do you think of Australia's voting, which requires voting fines for those who do not vote and make election days holidays with paid leave? And
Yes.
then a follow-up question is, how does the lack of civics requirements in high school curriculum affect voting?
Both great questions. I think
This is from Nad Permal. Thank you, Nad.
Thank you. I think mandatory voting would be great. I don't think it would fly in the United States, but so I actually think the making Election Day a holiday, giving people, I mean, we already give people paid time off, and theoretically people know that, but a lot of people don't feel like they can take it. That's one of the reasons we did the Vote Choice Act. So for people who don't know, what the Vote Choice Act allows is you now have voting centers that are open multiple days, ideally over a weekend, where you can vote wherever. So let's say you live in Alameda County, but you work in Contra Costa, you can go to the vote center in Contra Costa now that we have a statewide voter file, and you can cast your vote, and it'll be properly, you have your state ID, so we can find you and you can vote. And so that's why we've done that in California, so it's not just the day. Unfortunately, we have many states that are going in the opposite direction of restricting, right, early voting or restricting vote by mail. And so those kinds of reforms are really important to make sure that you just get rid of the barriers to voting, right? That's what we need to do with electoral reform, and we've done a lot of that in California. But you still need the outreach and the mobilization and the engagement. You still need to invite people in order for that to be effective. And the second half of the question was, sorry.
How does
curriculum.
the lack,
Lord.
curriculum in high schools?
Don't get me started. So for folks who don't know, you used to have a year of AP government in 12th grade. So right now, under the California curriculum rules, you have US government in 5th grade, 8th grade, 12th grade. It used to be in 12th grade, you got a year. Now it's one semester and you get economics. I love economics, it's wonderful. It's actually really important to know how to balance a checkbook, but it means you get half as much government. So I think it's both that you don't get enough of it, but I would argue how we teach it is a problem, right? We teach it as almost in some ways a memorization effort, right? That is mostly only focused on the federal level. We don't tend to talk about the local level at all. And it's very, what does the Supreme Court do? What does the House of Representatives do? What does the president do? Blah, blah, blah. It is incredibly boring. I know my daughter just went through AP government and it kills me because she's like, I hate politics. I'm like, oh, it's not my fault. It's not my fault. So what has been found to be really effective is what people call problem-based civics. So for example, if I come to you, Gabor, and I say, what is the most important problem that you see in your community? And you tell me X at whatever level, and then you work with a group of people to figure out, well, who's in charge of that, right? And it's through that then you find out, oh, there's overlapping jurisdiction. The county does it and the city does it. And then, oh, there's this company that has an influence on that. And so it's through a problem that you care about that then you understand how the institutions work. And you're also taught then that you have the right to access them. Right? And how to do that to solve something. I want a stop sign in my corner. Well, who's in charge of that? And we actually had a group who said the cafeteria food was horrible, and that was their project, is how do we make the food better, right? Who's in charge of that? Who decides what the menu is? And the school, this was a middle school, they ended up changing the cafeteria food, right? So it doesn't have to be something big and fabulous, right? It's just, how do I, when I think about a problem, figure out how to fix it so then I feel like later in my life when I identify a problem, I'm able to fix it. So part of it is the amount of civics, but I think the more important part is the way that we teach civics and that we're not trying to make participatory citizens. We're just trying to get people, again, to pass the AP government exam. And that's not really, I think, what democracy needs.
Okay. What impact will AI have on elections and getting people to vote?
Can I pass? Do I have a
It's
pass?
a trick question.
I don't know. This is, so I didn't talk about, so sorry, I was trying to be a little more optimistic. You know, usually when I teach, my students are like, God, this class is depressing. But it's going to fool people. I mean, I think it makes the whole disinformation ecosystem even more treacherous. And so I think we need some good strategies to push against it, but I don't think we're ready as a society. So again, I think that's why the other thing we have found people are really hungry for is high quality sources of information. I think right now people just have too much information and they don't know what to believe and they don't know what to trust. And that also makes people disengage because it's just too much to cognitively to figure out. So I'm guessing that will make that problem worse. And I have a sinking feeling it's going to get worse before it gets better. So I would say if there are any AI, people in the room, what we should be working on is how to identify it, right? How do you know, helping people know, oh, this is real, this is fake. I realize that's not an easy thing to do, but that may be where we need more investment is how to use it for its good purposes and have a way to avoid the more nefarious applications that it could have. Sorry not to have a better answer. Talk to the computer science department.
Okay, well, this is maybe an opposite question, but what about postcard campaigns?
I'm sorry to say, I know many of you have probably handwritten postcards to Ohio on multiple occasions. They work with people who already vote. So they are quite effective. They don't work with people who don't vote. And the experiment we did on this, you might appreciate, forgive me, any Catholics in the room who are offended, but we did an experiment with a faith-based group, a postcard that had Jesus on the front and the Virgin Mary on the back. And we thought people won't throw away Jesus. They did. They did. The thought was like if you had Jesus, people would put it on the refrigerator and like remember it. No, did not work. So if Jesus didn't work, I'm guessing other postcards don't really work. Would be my, we have not found for low propensity voters. Again, you have to think about different kinds of voters. If it's for high propensity folks who you just want to make sure they turn out, postcards are very effective. So are texts. For low propensity folks who you're really trying to shift their behavior, that postcard is just not enough. It's not enough of an engagement. If they're already if they've already had a conversation and you're following up that conversation with a postcard, that works. But the postcard on its own, no.
Okay, so this is another two-part question. Are people disgusted with the parties in the political system because they are misinformed, or rather than our political system really being broken, is it that the media and internet complex that is disillusioning people?
That is a really good question. I think it's both. I do think one of my frustrations with the media, so I spent some time working on the Hill, and I've spent a lot of time working with different elected officials, and every elected official I've ever met is engaged in public service because there's something they really profoundly care about, right? They have something drove them to run for elected office. Now, it may be true that, they care about that thing and then they're not as interested in these other things, but like there's something they really want to do and they're doing it because they want to serve. And I don't see a whole lot of media stories talking about that, right? That somebody who went into office, think about what Pat Schroeder did to get the Family Medical Leave Act passed, right? And all the work that she did in her career. Sorry, I'm aging myself on this one. But she did incredible work for women's rights and support of children. And that's what she cared about passionately, and that's what she did. And so we don't hear stories about that, right? We hear about somebody doing something wrong, or we hear about, and so I think the problem is the current environment of needing, the media, their businesses, they need to make money. I understand they have an imperative in that regard. And by feeding the beast with sort of negativity and scandal and all those kinds of things, I think we reinforce people's worst ideas about politics. And so I wish there were more opportunities to hear about the good things, that local governments are doing or that other elected officials are doing to actually try to the best of their ability to solve some really big problems. And so I think that is a big part of the problem. I also think the parties, one of the challenges in the United States, and I'm sorry if I'm going to get too political sciencey at the moment, we have a majoritarian presidential system, right, which is pretty inflexible in the sense that in a parliamentary system, the prime minister is only in office so long as they have majority support in the legislature, right? And so if they lose majority support in the legislature, that they have new elections and then they get a new prime minister. And so there's flexibility there when the coalition changes in the legislative body. In our system, the president rules regardless of what power they have in the legislature. And so that is a baked in logjam, right? Especially when you have divided government. But even when it's your own party, right? We had Democratic Congress for most of the 20th century. Democratic presidents didn't just get stuff through, right? The Congress had its own power. And so that was on purpose, right? The founders created that on purpose because they wanted it to be hard to get legislation passed. And so part of it is the nature of our system creates a very strong need for majority parties in legislatures that then I think have negative consequences for democracy in elections, right? And so we need parties in the legislatures, but the fact that they have majoritarian, they have to get that 50%. You can't elect someone with 25%. You have no proportional representation. Creates some weird idiosyncratic outcomes in our elections. And so some of it is structural, and then some of it is the media environment. And the fact that people don't understand how that our institutions were purposely designed to not get stuff done, right? Hamilton, sorry, I love the musical, but Hamilton was an elitist, right? Hamilton was afraid of the people, right? This is why we did not directly elect our Senate until 1913, right? Because they were afraid of the passions of the mob. And they created our institutions to have brakes on the passions of the mob. But what that means now in this time is it means it's very difficult to get anyone's passions through the legislative system. And I think people need to understand that democracy is about compromise, and the current, I think, narrative ecosystem is very much about absolutist. If it's not 100%, you sold out. And that frame is not productive given the way that our democracy is constructed. And so I think that's also the problem, is how the institutions are batting up against the media environment and the social media ecosystem.
Okay, thank you. One quick question and then a final question for you, Lisa. Okay. Is it possible to get a copy of your presentation?
Sure.
Okay, we will get that out. And here's the final question.
I feel like I'm on Jeopardy.
I need a drum roll. What is the impact of the composition and decisions of SCOTUS?
How does the SCOTUS decision affect UC? Is that the question? Or how does the SCOTUS decision affect higher ed? Sorry, who's the question?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, how does it affect democracy? Which SCOTUS decision? There have been so many. They've been not horrible on voting rights. That's good. I'm guessing folks meant the affirmative action one. Is that, yes? Yes, was that, or all of them? I mean, I think there's the broader question of the Supreme Court as an institution and its role in our democracy, right? And so I think it's important. People tend to hold up the Warren Court, which is the court that did Brown v. Board and the court that did a lot of civil rights and legal rights expansions, as sort of the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court historically in the United States has been a regressive institution, pretty much throughout history, right? So I think we need to put the Supreme Court in context and say, and law in and of itself is a regressive institution because it's based on past precedent, right? By definition, it is small c conservative. It's not going to change in radical ways because of the way that legal language has to be justified, right? Or legal changes have to be justified. And so there are lots of, the court is not behaving all that differently from how previous courts have behaved. That said, I think, it's hard for me as a woman and as a woman of color to not be troubled. You know, my daughter is starting college in the fall, and as she was doing her applications after the Dobbs decision, for the first time I had to think about, well, what state is she going to go to college, right? I don't want her in a state that doesn't have abortion rights. That was a weird thing to have to, as someone who grew up with Roe existing, right, during my lifetime that I'm aware of, that was a very, I think for many women, or just for me at least, that was very disheartening, right, to see that change. And so I don't want to minimize the direct impact these decisions are going to have on a lot of people's lives. And I think the ways in which it's undermining people's faith in the Supreme Court. And if we look at democracies whose judicial branch loses, because the judicial branch is kind of a weird branch, right? It's got no guns, it's got no enforcement, it's got no way to make anybody do what it says. And so it really requires very strong faith in the institution and for the other branches of government to follow the judiciary. And in many democracies, especially in Latin America, you've had a judiciary that has no authority. And that's really bad for democracy. So my bigger worry, the substantive issues are troubling, but my bigger worry is that if we don't have a strong judiciary in US democracy, that's going to make things even worse moving forward. And if people don't have faith that the Supreme Court is unbiased in its evaluation of things, then that's really troubling for our institutions and for the future of those institutions. So sorry to end on a negative note, but that's more my worry is I don't think they're, in a way, they're kind of going back to the mean of where the Supreme Court's always been. But I think it means, given their rulings are so out of line with what most people think should be happening in society. If you look at public opinion, that disconnect, I think, over time may undermine the Supreme Court in ways that we can't come back from. That was a dark ending.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. Yes, we really appreciate your insights and your wisdom and expertise. So thank you. We will now be bringing you lunch, and toward the end of lunch, then we'll hear from Chancellor Christ. So thank you so much for your attention and engagement and the wonderful questions, and enjoy your lunch. Thank you. Okay, welcome back. Thank you again to the UC Jazz Alumni Ensemble. We really appreciate your joining us today. Thank you. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch. And now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Carol Christ, UC Berkeley's 11th Chancellor. Chancellor Christ is a celebrated scholar of Victorian literature and is well known as a champion for quality, accessible public higher education, a broad education in the liberal arts and sciences, and women's issues and diversity on college campuses. Chancellor Christ spent more than 3 decades as a professor and administrator at Berkeley before serving as president of Smith College from 2002 to 2013. She returned to Berkeley in 2015 to direct the Center for the Studies in Higher Education. She was appointed interim executive vice chancellor and provost in 2016, and then named chancellor in 2017. Since her return, Chancellor Christ has worked to improve the campus climate for people of all backgrounds, strengthen our financial position, address a housing shortage, and lead a strategic plan and accompanying campaign. Chancellor Christ recently announced that she will be retiring at the end of June 2024. However, today's talk is hardly a farewell. There is much work remaining to address the university's top priorities, and she will continue to bring her vision and goals to fruition. Please join me in welcoming Chancellor Christ to tell us about it, and we will hold a Q&A discussion at the end.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Lachelle, for the warm welcome, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. When I became chancellor on July 1st, 2017, this was the first group that I addressed, so it's particularly meaningful to me that I'm talking to you today. The Wheeler Society inspires me to look back at where Berkeley's been and look forward to where it's going. In a speech Benjamin Ide Wheeler gave in 1910, he called the university's founders idealists. They laid off the garment of a real environment and robed themselves in the slender fabric of a dream. Wheeler continued, they left trodden ways of life as it was and plunged into the open fields of imagination as to what it shall be. I think that that's still a really good description of Berkeley, even though it's from more than 100 years ago. In many ways, the pandemic, economy, political unrest, and other events of the last few years have plunged Berkeley into new imaginings and I'd like to share some of them with you. In February 2020, nearly 350 friends gathered at the stadium, including perhaps some of you, to celebrate the launch of Light the Way. This historic campaign to raise $6 billion for Berkeley is one of the largest goals ever attempted by a public university without a medical school. We didn't foresee the coming of COVID-19. Just 2 weeks later, it actually was just a week and a half, 10 days from that launch, that we closed the university and went remote. And we wondered, how could we possibly raise such an audacious amount when most of us were on lockdown? Throughout history, Berkeley's community has rallied to turn crisis into opportunity, and this time was no different. We crossed the $6 billion line last November with a gift to the Robert T. Matsui Center for Politics and Public Service. It will support a new training and mentoring program for students who complete a summer internship in Washington, D.C. These are probably already voters, Lisa. Not only did this gift help secure Berkeley's future, it gives more students a chance to work in service to our democracy. We've also reached our goal for undergraduate scholarships in the campaign and seen an uptick in gifts that help meet students' basic needs and create a diverse, equitable, and welcoming campus. The Wheeler Society has contributed greatly to this early success. So far during Light the Way, Berkeley has received nearly $470 million in estate distributions and $55 million in new life income gifts. In addition, we've closed new bequest commitments totaling over $515 million. So you can see that it's a sixth of the money we've raised. Revenue from your gifts adds significantly to our endowment and plays a crucial role in stabilizing Berkeley's finances. On behalf of the academic units, students, faculty, and other areas that you support, I extend my gratitude. Just because we met the campaign goal does not mean we've fully met every need. With less than a year until the campaign closes, the work continues. Our first focus is increasing investments in faculty. While undergraduates have increased by roughly 7,500 since 2006, full-time faculty has remained around 1,500. A central priority is to add 100 tenure-track faculty positions and provide sufficient resources for them to conduct research with students. To date, 38 new positions have been established. We also want to create 300 new graduate fellowships. Graduate students contribute to and drive research while mentoring undergraduates and helping them connect with the faculty. We must be able to offer higher funding packages to support tomorrow's leaders and preserve Berkeley's renown in innovation and discovery. To date, 57 endowed doctoral fellowships have been funded. The final critical priority is investing in places of possibility, new buildings that will transform where our faculty and students live, work, and learn. In particular, the Gateway is now emerging on the north side of campus, that's where Tolman Hall used to be, as the future home for our new College of Computing, Data Science, and Society. It's the first new college at Berkeley in over 50 years. This interdisciplinary space will unite more than 1,300 faculty, students, and staff to research and collaborate on urgent issues such as climate change, health and biomedicine, and human welfare and social justice. The Gateway will also respond to the booming interest in data science among undergraduates. It's our fastest growing major, who want to change society yet need data techniques to do so. To date, we've raised 60% of the Gateway's $577 million goal. Thank you for supporting the campaign. Together, we're called to light the way for Berkeley, our unique and priceless public good. The campaign is not the only thing happening at Berkeley. I'd like to share some other highlights from this year. After 2.5 years of living inside our tiny Zoom boxes, we returned to in-person learning, athletics, and extracurricular activities last fall. I will never take for granted the power and purpose of community. The campus feels more alive than ever. Then in November, the United Auto Workers Union, that represents graduate student researchers and other academic groups, began a strike at all University of California campuses with demands for higher pay, childcare subsidies, and better health care, among others. The strike was the largest in the history of U.S. higher education. Instruction, research, and other operations were greatly affected. Yet we were hopeful that the UC Office of the President, which managed the negotiations, would find solutions. New contracts were approved in December, and work is ongoing to sort through finances, human resources, and other complicated issues. Above all, these academic workers will be among the best supported in public higher education in the country, and we remain steadfast in rebuilding community. Even with the strike, research is booming. Just this month, one new study shows that coyotes, gray foxes, and other animals are returning home after a mega fire wiped out part of Mendocino County in 2018. Another study has uncovered a mechanism that may explain why poor sleep can increase a person's risk of diabetes. A third study, this is my favorite, reveals a handheld device that can convert water molecules from the air into drinkable water, possibly addressing the urgent drought conditions exacerbated by climate change. On the undergraduate front, we're busy preparing to welcome a strong, diverse class. Once these new students arrive, they'll be introduced to Berkeley Discovery, a new initiative with a big goal to ensure that every undergraduate can pursue experiences beyond the classroom that cultivate their deeper talents and interests. A key component of Berkeley Discovery is a centralized database of research, internship, scholarship, public service, and other opportunities. It demystifies the dizzying array of experiences many students don't know how to find. More than 10% of undergraduates used it in the first few months, and it experienced a 200% growth in June. Another key component of Berkeley Discovery involves 6 trailblazing teams that are transforming their department's curricula into more active project-based learning. One team, for example, proposes a profound reimagining of beginning courses in reading and composition and in foreign languages from skill-based requirements to inquiry-based experiences and collaborative projects. Another team is funding new facilities and equipment so that physics and astronomy students can bring life to what they're learning in the classroom. In just 2 years, nearly 5,000 students have benefited from these new curricular modules. No public university of Berkeley's size has attempted to scale up a program like this, and donors have played a major role in getting it off the ground. Imagine what's possible when every student can connect to a transformative experience. Beyond what students learn, where they live is just as crucial. Many students cannot afford food, housing, or other costs of living. At the same time, we can only accommodate about 30% of our undergraduates on campus. 2 housing projects will help meet this urgent need. Some of you may have passed the Helen Diller Anchor House that's taking shape right across from the campus's west entrance. dedicated to over 700 transfer students who often struggle to find housing and connect to traditional student experiences. It will include furnished apartments, a culinary classroom, and a fitness center. It'll also generate income to fund scholarships for students from underrepresented communities. Construction has also begun on the Albany Village, which will provide 761 furnished apartments for single graduate students without children. It will also offer spaces for social interaction and well-being. This village will triple our supply of housing for single graduate students. You're part of the greater Cal family that makes all of this possible. Thank you for joining our vision of a world in which the brightest students from all walks of life have full access to an excellent education. The top faculty can pursue their highest and scientific and humanistic aspirations, and the best facilities can seed new ideas, collaborations, and breakthroughs. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol. We do have some questions from the audience. Thank you. There are many wonderful and significant things occurring at Berkeley. Why are they not more extensively covered in the press? And your publicity people are failing in sports, scientific achievement, social research. We need better PR.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, newspapers are more interested in bad news than good news. I mean, we certainly try to get the good stories out there. And there's a digest of such good stories that occur, but I think that it's just, it's not catastrophic news. Although, I mean, there have been wonderful stories in the past several years. Jennifer Doudna's Nobel Prize and the technology that came from it, the CRISPR technology, is an extraordinary story. It's really, really wonderful. And this story that I just mentioned in my talk about this graduate student who discovered how to get drinking water from the air is also an amazing story, which did get some press coverage.
So this is a question about admissions, another tough issue. Why can't a student with a 4.3 GPA be sure of admission to a top-tier UC?
That's a really complicated question. We have here just at Berkeley 125,000 applications for about 6,000 places in our freshman class. The other top UCs, UCLA, UC San Diego, UC Irvine, UC Davis, UC Santa Barbara, have similarly competitive admissions with over 100,000 applications. I feel so bad that we cannot accommodate more of these extraordinary students. They're just wonderful. We could fill our freshman class many times over with just exceptional students. One of the odd things about higher education at this moment is the most competitive institutions are bursting at the seams, have tens to over 100,000 applications, whereas smaller places are closing their doors, unable to find enough students. So it's a really hard moment in higher education. I think that the way forward for Berkeley in trying to serve more students has to either come from satellite campuses. We just got a letter from the mayor of San Francisco this week saying, why don't you establish a campus in downtown San Francisco? Or with some combination of remote and in-person learning. But this actual physical campus, I don't think can take any more students. In fact, the city of Berkeley thinks it already has way too many students.
Okay, well, related to that, this last question is, do you think your vision for People's Park will ever be realized?
I've said one of my goals is before I leave to put a shovel in the ground at People's Park. Um, uh, right now, People's Park is caught up in the courts because of a California law called CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. You have to assess the environmental impacts of every project that you do. And a judge thought we hadn't sufficiently assessed those impacts. He felt that we didn't assess the impact of what he called social noise, interpret student parties, and also that we should have assessed every site for housing before deciding to build on People's Park. We've now appealed that case to the California Supreme Court, and we're also pursuing a legislative solution as well. So it's very much my hope that we'll be able to start the project soon. So thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Chancellor Christ. Thank you, Professor Garcia Bedoya. And thanks to you, our essential donors. You help us ensure that Berkeley remains the #1 university. I hope you leave today with new knowledge, renewed love for Berkeley, and maybe even a new friend. One quick reminder before we leave, if you parked your car with the valet, the attendants will meet you in the lower Sproul garage, and you can take an elevator through the Student Union. The staff will be available to assist you down to the garage. And now I am thrilled to welcome the Cal Band to close out our time together.